The chandeliers shimmered like captured moons above the ballroom. Every surface glittered. Silverware caught the light, champagne flutes clinked in elegant rhythm, and the soft murmur of wealth hummed through the air like background music. The kind of evening where everyone smiled just a little too brightly, as if happiness itself could be rehearsed. Evelyn Hart stood near the end of the long reception table, the soft navy fabric of her dress pooling quietly around her feet. At 68, she carried herself with a calm that came not from pride, but from endurance. She had been a librarian for 3 decades, her life spent among words, whispers, and the steady ticking of time. Tonight, she was simply Mother of the Bride, a title she had once dreamed of wearing with joy. The dream, however, had begun to fracture long before the wedding band played its first note. Rachel, her only daughter, had always been ambitious. That much Evelyn admired. But ambition, she had learned, can become a different creature when fed by fear and polished by privilege. As Evelyn watched Rachel glide across the marble floor in her vintage silk gown, the very same dress Evelyn had worn on her own wedding day 40 years ago, she wanted to believe her daughter's choice to wear it was sentimental, that it was love, that it meant something. Then she heard it. It came softly at first, barely rising above the string quartet's gentle melody. Rachel was laughing with her new mother-in-law, Vivian Ashmore, a woman whose pearls looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. Vivian leaned close, whispering something that made Rachel tilt her head back and laugh, the kind of laugh that sounds rehearsed. "She's just a tired old woman who never achieved anything," Rachel said. The words sliced through the air before Evelyn even realized they were meant for her. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne glass. She didn't breathe. Around her, the chatter continued, unaware that one sentence had just cracked a mother's heart wide open. Vivian nodded approvingly, her smile poised and elegant. Well, at least she knows her place. Not everyone from humble beginnings does. That was when something inside Evelyn shifted. It wasn't rage, not exactly. It was the deep, cold ache of betrayal that comes when the person you love most in the world finally says aloud what you feared they might think. She looked at her daughter, radiant, graceful, beloved by a room full of strangers, and for a fleeting second, she saw herself reflected in those eyes, not as a mother, but as an inconvenience. Evelyn set her glass down carefully. The orchestra changed its tune, preparing for the toasts. Rachel and Michael, her new husband, took their seats at the head table. Vivian stood first, offering the expected speech a cascade of polite gratitude and social niceties. Laughter, applause, another round of champagne. Then came Rachel's turn. "Thank you everyone for being here," her daughter began, her voice steady through the microphone. "It means the world to us to have our families together, especially my mother, who's always supported me, even when times were hard." A few guests turned to smile at Evelyn, who nodded politely. The words were right, but the tone was brittle, hollow. Rachel continued, "I've learned from both my parents that love takes sacrifice. My father taught me ambition, and my mother—" She paused, glancing at Vivian with a grin that wasn't meant for Evelyn at all. "My mother taught me patience, maybe a little too much patience." Laughter rippled through the room. Evelyn felt the air thin. Something inside her rose, not anger, not humiliation, but a kind of quiet resolve she hadn't felt since the day her husband, Thomas, died. She reached into her purse. Her fingers brushed against an old digital recorder, one she had carried for years without truly knowing why. It had been Thomas's, back when he'd been too weak to speak for long. Before he passed, he'd said, "If she ever forgets who she is, or who you are, make her remember." Evelyn stood. The microphone wavered slightly in Rachel's hand as the room turned toward her. "Rachel," Evelyn said softly, her voice steady but commanding. "You've always had such a beautiful way with words. But perhaps tonight, everyone should hear your father's." A hush fell over the ballroom. Before Rachel could respond, Evelyn pressed play. Thomas's voice filled the room, older, gentler, but firm. "My darling Rachel," it began, "if you're hearing this, it means your mother stood by you long after I was gone. I want you to know that everything you have, your education, your dreams, your confidence came from her sacrifices. Never forget that she gave you her strength so you could stand where you are now. Don't mistake humility for failure or love for weakness. The laughter, the music, even the clinking glasses vanished. The only sound was the quiet, trembling breath of a daughter hearing her father's voice for the first time in years. Rachel's eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit from the moment, but there was none. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence did it for her. When the message ended, Evelyn took a breath that seemed to carry decades of swallowed words. She placed the recorder on the table beside her daughter's untouched glass of champagne. "For the record," she said quietly, "your father always believed in both of us. I still do." No one moved. The chandeliers swayed gently from the stillness, and for the first time all evening, the room felt honest. Evelyn turned to the guests, her voice calm but steady. "If you've ever been dismissed by your own family, stay with me," she said. "You might see yourself in my story." She paused, her gaze sweeping the stunned crowd. "My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 68 years old, and until that moment, I believed my daughter still respected me. I was wrong. But what happened after that toast, what I uncovered in the weeks that followed, changed everything." She reached for her clutch, holding it against her chest as if to steady the beating underneath. "So let me take you back," she said softly, "to where it all began." The camera would linger on her face, calm now, but with eyes that held storms. The strings would fade into a low hum, and the audience would feel the shift. This wasn't just a story about a wedding. It was about betrayal, dignity, and the quiet power of a woman rediscovering her worth. This is Grandma's final chapter, a place where stories like Evelyn's remind us that aging doesn't mean fading, and that dignity is worth defending at any age. If you believe every senior deserves respect, independence, and the chance to live on their own terms, please like this video, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice helps our community grow, and your story might just be the next one we tell. The sound of the ocean had always been a comfort to Evelyn Hart. That morning, however, it felt different. The waves no longer sounded like home. They sounded like distance, like something unreachable. She had driven 4 hours from her small apartment in Portland to Nantucket, the route winding through pine forests and coastal roads that smelled of salt and old wood. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual. The sky above the highway was pale gray, the color of paper left out in the rain. The invitation had arrived 2 months earlier, written in elegant script that didn't feel like her daughter's handwriting. "Mr. and Mrs. Michael Ashmore request the honor of your presence." It was not Rachel and Michael. It was as if her daughter had already stepped into another world, one that Evelyn could visit only by invitation. Her apartment back in Portland was small but tidy. Books lined every wall. There was always a faint scent of tea leaves and old pages. The thought of leaving that quiet space to enter the manicured perfection of the Ashmore estate made her stomach twist. She had chosen her outfit carefully, a navy dress, simple and graceful, with pearl earrings Thomas had given her on their 20th anniversary. She had even polished her old black heels the night before. Respectable, she had thought, modest but dignified. When the ferry docked at the island and she caught her first glimpse of the estate, Evelyn had felt her breath catch. The mansion stood against the horizon like something from a postcard, its windows catching the morning sun. Rows of white hydrangeas framed a driveway so long it could have been its own road. Everything gleamed with that effortless perfection that only great wealth can produce. As she parked her aging sedan among a fleet of sleek cars, she glanced down at the invitation again, as though to remind herself she belonged there, at least for the day. Inside, the air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. A string quartet played softly from somewhere near the grand staircase. Guests in tailored suits and silk gowns drifted through the hall, balancing crystal glasses as they laughed about art, politics, and real estate. Evelyn felt invisible almost immediately. It was not the unkind kind of invisibility, but the casual kind that comes from being surrounded by people who have never had to notice someone like you. Then she saw her daughter. Rachel stood at the top of the staircase, radiant in an ivory gown that shimmered with every movement. For a brief second, Evelyn's heart lifted. The fabric was familiar, achingly so. It was her own wedding dress, the one she had worn in 1975 when she married Thomas in a small church outside Augusta. She had kept it folded in a cedar chest for decades, wrapped in tissue paper, waiting for the day Rachel might want it. And Rachel had wanted it, or so she had said. "Mom, it's vintage. It's classic," she had insisted over the phone. "Everyone will love that I'm wearing your dress." At the time, those words had filled Evelyn with warmth. She had imagined that her daughter saw beauty in the history of it, in the stitches she had sewn herself, in the way the fabric had brushed against the church floor as she walked toward Thomas all those years ago. But standing there now, surrounded by guests who whispered about designer labels and family legacies, Evelyn realized Rachel hadn't chosen the dress for sentiment. She had chosen it for the story it told to others. In that setting, the gown was no longer a symbol of love or memory. It was a prop, a curated relic from a simpler past repurposed to make her new life seem richer, deeper, more charming. When Rachel spotted her mother, she smiled a bright, polished smile made for photographs. "Mom, you made it," she called out. Evelyn smiled back, her throat tight. "Of course I did." Rachel twirled lightly, letting the skirt flare. "Isn't it beautiful?" The tailor made a few adjustments, but it fits perfectly. Everyone's obsessed with the vintage look. Evelyn nodded, pretending to admire it. The alterations were subtle but clear. The neckline had been lowered, the sleeves shortened, the lace dyed slightly warmer to match the color palette of the Ashmore family wedding theme. "It suits you," Evelyn said softly, though the words tasted like something she had to swallow. The photographer approached, eager to capture a mother-daughter moment. Rachel leaned in, arm wrapped loosely around Evelyn's shoulder. The flash caught them both in a single frame, though Evelyn could tell her own smile didn't match her daughter's confidence. As they walked through the hallway toward the bridal suite, Evelyn's gaze caught on something hanging near the stairs. It was a photograph in a thin silver frame, half hidden behind a vase of lilies. She stepped closer and froze. It was her own wedding photo, her and Thomas on the church steps, laughing as rice flew through the air. The same gown, the same woman, but the glass of the frame was cracked diagonally from corner to corner, a thin line running right through Thomas's face. Someone had clearly dropped it. The frame had been left hanging anyway, the crack gleaming faintly under the chandelier light. A small tag below the frame read, "Family Heritage, the Hart Wedding, 1975. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment. The crack looked like a scar, something delicate yet permanent. She wondered who had decided to leave it hanging that way. Perhaps it was meant as a gesture of respect, a nod to the past without bothering to fix it. Or perhaps no one had cared enough to notice the flaw. She reached out and touched the cool surface of the broken glass. For a fleeting second, she imagined Thomas standing beside her, shaking his head with that quiet humor he had always had. "They've framed the past, Evie," he would have said, "but they've forgotten to see it." She let her hand drop to her side. The sound of laughter echoed from the other room. Rachel's voice carried above the rest, warm and bright, the voice of a woman perfectly at home in her new world. Evelyn turned away from the photograph and walked slowly toward the dining hall. The weight in her chest was heavy, not because of anger, but because of recognition. It was not the distance between wealth and modesty that hurt her. It was the distance between love and performance. By the time she reached her seat, she had already decided that this was not the day she had imagined. It was not a celebration of union, but a performance of status. And she was the one sentimental detail that didn't fit the theme. The dress, the photo, the broken glass. Each piece told the same story. Rachel had not inherited her mother's simplicity. She had inherited her father's ambition, stripped of its heart. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap, listening as the orchestra tuned for the first dance. She tried to remind herself that sometimes appearances are only masks, that maybe Rachel still loved her underneath the glitter and the rehearsed smiles. But deep down, Evelyn knew. Some cracks cannot be repaired. They can only be acknowledged, quietly, the way a photograph remains hung even after the glass has broken. She looked down at her own reflection in the polished silverware. The woman who stared back at her seemed both familiar and foreign, like a memory that had been rewritten by someone else. The music swelled, and Evelyn forced herself to breathe. The story, she thought, was just beginning. And somewhere inside that house full of strangers, the truth waited silent, fragile, and ready to shatter the illusion of perfection once and for all. The garden was glowing in the soft light of early evening, strung with hundreds of tiny bulbs that swayed in the ocean breeze. Their golden hue softened the marble columns and cast moving shadows over the rows of crystal glasses set along the terrace. It was the kind of beauty that seemed to hum quietly, as if the world itself had learned to whisper. Evelyn had stepped outside to breathe. Inside the ballroom, the air had become too thick, the laughter too polished. Every conversation seemed to revolve around something she could not touch. Real estate, hedge funds, trust accounts, destination honeymoons. The words formed a language she could understand but had no place speaking. Out here, among the faint scent of roses and salt air, she could pretend she was simply attending another wedding, one of many she had helped plan at the library community hall years ago. Her glass of champagne trembled slightly in her hand as she walked along the stone path. Somewhere behind the hedges, she heard voices. She would have kept walking had the second voice not belonged to her daughter. "Do not worry about her," Rachel said lightly. "She is just a tired old woman who never achieved anything, worked in a public library all her life. Depressing, isn't it?" Evelyn stopped. The stem of her glass pressed sharply against her palm. The music from inside faded into a dull echo. Vivian Ashmore's voice followed, smooth and practiced. "At least she knows her place. Some people from simpler backgrounds tend to forget that." The words hit harder than Evelyn expected. It was not only the insult, but the casual tone that tore through her. Rachel's voice was not angry or defensive. It was relaxed, as if she were describing a stranger. Her hand trembled, and the champagne rippled to the rim. She took a step back, but the heel of her shoe caught a loose pebble. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might fall, and then the sound of her own breath steadied her. She turned her face away, staring toward the dark edge of the lawn. Beyond the glow of the party lights, the ocean stretched out in darkness, its endless rhythm whispering against the cliffs. She had taught Rachel to love that sound when her daughter was little. They used to walk the beach together, collecting shells and driftwood after storms. "The waves never stop," Evelyn used to say. "They pull back, but they always return." Tonight, that memory stung. Evelyn pressed a hand against her chest, feeling the small weight of her purse against her side. Inside it, wrapped in an envelope worn soft with time, was Thomas's letter. She had carried it for 3 years without opening it. When he was dying, he had asked her to promise. "If she ever forgets where she came from, remind her," he had said, his hand cold in hers. At the time, Evelyn had smiled through her tears, thinking he meant that Rachel might one day forget the value of hard work or kindness. She had never imagined it could mean this. She stood there, listening as her daughter and Vivian continued to talk. "Michael worries about her," Rachel said, her tone suddenly careful. "She lives alone, and I'm afraid she might not be safe anymore. She forgets things sometimes, little things, bills, appointments." Vivian responded with the kind of sympathy that sounds like superiority. "It happens to all of them eventually. It is good you are planning ahead." Planning ahead. Evelyn closed her eyes. She had always believed that grief dulled with time, that losing Thomas had already taught her everything there was to know about pain. But this was a new kind of ache, sharper and deeper, because it came from someone still living, someone she had raised with her own hands. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. She would not give the night that satisfaction. Slowly, she set her glass down on the edge of the stone railing. Her fingers brushed the soft leather of her purse, and she felt the hard corner of the envelope beneath it. The paper was cool against her fingertips, and for a moment she imagined Thomas sitting beside her, his voice warm and steady. He had always been the one to see further than she did. When Rachel was young, he would say, "She has your heart, but she will need my sense. One day she will have to choose which to listen to." Now it seemed Rachel had chosen neither. The laughter from the terrace drifted again, followed by the clink of glass. Rachel's voice had changed, light and charming once more, as if the conversation about her mother had never happened. Evelyn turned toward the sea. The lights behind her glittered against the dark, their reflections scattered across the waves like fragments of broken glass. If she were to open the letter, she knew everything might change. It was the last thing Thomas had written before he died. A message for her, sealed and waiting. He had pressed it into her hand on a cold morning in the hospital. "Only if you need it," he had said. For years she had wondered what that meant. Now she knew. It was not curiosity that tempted her. It was the quiet certainty that Thomas had seen something coming long before she did. She drew a breath and whispered, "You were right, Tom." The wind lifted the edge of her hair, carrying her words into the night. Inside, a cheer erupted as someone made a toast. The orchestra swelled again, violins sweeping upward in celebration. Evelyn watched the windows glow with gold light, a perfect picture from a distance, flawless and empty. Her heart steadied. She straightened her shoulders and picked up her glass. She did not take another sip. Instead, she looked toward the ballroom and whispered to herself, "If she has truly forgotten, then I will remind her." It was not a threat. It was a promise. She slipped the glass onto a passing waiter's tray, her face calm, her steps unhurried. The party went on, oblivious. No one noticed the older woman walking toward the garden gate, the hem of her dress brushing against the stone path like the whisper of a tide returning to shore. As she walked, the memory of Thomas's voice echoed softly in her mind. If she ever forgets where she came from, remind her. Would she open the letter? Would she dare to hold her daughter accountable, even if it meant losing her forever? The question hung in the night air, unanswered but alive. Behind her, laughter rose again, bright and shallow. Ahead, the darkness waited like an open door. Evelyn touched the envelope inside her purse and felt its steady, patient presence. It seemed to pulse with its own quiet heartbeat. She took one last look at the house that now belonged to another world. A world she had built but could no longer enter, and whispered, almost tenderly, "If this is what it takes to save myself, then yes, Thomas, I will open it." The wind carried the scent of roses, and somewhere in the distance, the sea roared its approval. The party had ended, at least for her. From the terrace, the music drifted faintly through the open doors, mingling with the sound of the sea. Laughter still echoed down the hall, but Evelyn walked away from it as if leaving behind a language she no longer understood. The Ashmore Library was easy to find. She had noticed it earlier in the evening, a large double door off the main corridor, half open and glowing with an artificial white light. It was the kind of room that was designed to impress rather than to be used. The shelves were lined with leather-bound books arranged by color, their spines untouched, the dust perfectly wiped away by someone paid to make them look timeless. She stepped inside. The scent of polished wood and cold air conditioning met her immediately. It was a beautiful space, but lifeless. Every object, every spine on the shelf, every framed diploma had been placed to suggest intelligence without intimacy, the kind of knowledge that could be displayed but not felt. Her heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she crossed to the window. The curtains were drawn back, and beyond the glass the Atlantic stretched endlessly, black and silver under the moonlight. She slipped her purse onto the desk and sat down. Her hands were trembling. For a long moment, she simply stared at the envelope. It had aged differently than she had. The paper was yellowed at the edges but intact, as though time had passed around it rather than through it. Across the front, in Thomas's careful handwriting, were the words, "For Evelyn, only if she forgets who you are." She traced each letter with her fingertip. His handwriting had always been steady, a mark of the patience that had once infuriated her and later became her anchor. She remembered the last time she saw him hold a pen, his hand shaking as he signed their will. He had looked up at her afterward and said, "Some words are heavier than signatures." Evelyn inhaled slowly, then tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of stationery from his hospital room, creased neatly in thirds. The ink was slightly faded, but the writing was clear. "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and something has happened that made you feel small in your own daughter's eyes. I hope I am wrong, but I have seen a change in her that you have refused to see. I know you want to believe that love alone can bring her back to who she was, but love without honesty becomes blindness." Evelyn stopped reading for a moment. Her heart beat hard in her chest. "Rachel has been asking questions about our finances. She says she wants to make sure you will be comfortable after I pass, but I sense another motive. She asked what accounts are in my name, which ones are joint, and how much the house would sell for if it came to that. She even asked if there were any debts she might need to manage on your behalf." The words blurred slightly as Evelyn blinked. Her throat burned. "2 days ago, she brought me brochures from a place called Willow Creek Manor. She said it was a community for active seniors, full of activities and gentle routines. She said, 'Mom needs structure.' At first I thought she meant it kindly, but the more she spoke, the more I realized she was imagining a world where you were placed somewhere safe and out of sight." Evelyn lowered the letter and looked around the library again. The cold light reflected off the rows of unread books, and she realized how much this room resembled the life her daughter seemed to want for her. Immaculate, quiet, preserved, but ultimately unused. She continued reading. "I do not want to frighten you, my love, but I have taken steps to protect you. I changed the will last week. Everything goes to you now, without contest. I have written clear instructions that Rachel cannot access any funds or property unless you choose to share them. She will think I am being unfair. Perhaps I am, but I would rather be unfair to her pride than to your dignity." Her hand went to her mouth. She had not known he had done that. "She is preparing papers, Evelyn, I have seen them. Drafts from a lawyer friend of hers. Documents about power of attorney, asset transfers, guardianship. She says it is just planning ahead. Do not let her sign for you. Promise me that, whatever charm she uses, whatever guilt she plants in your heart, remember this: independence is not stubbornness, it is survival." The line trembled across the page, as though written with the last of his strength. Evelyn felt tears rise, but forced herself to keep reading. "You have spent your life giving, always giving, and now you must learn to protect what is yours. That includes yourself. I know you love her. So do I. But love her enough to stop her before she forgets how to love you back." At the bottom, in his careful script, he had signed, "Forever yours, Thomas." Beneath his name, a final note in smaller handwriting. "P.S. I saw the Willow Creek brochure in her purse again today. She is planning something. Do not let her do it." Evelyn folded the letter carefully, though her hands were shaking so badly she nearly tore the paper. She pressed it against her chest, feeling the coolness of the ink through the thin fabric of her dress. For a moment, the world tilted. The soft hum of the air conditioning sounded like wind through trees, like the breeze that had once carried her and Thomas's laughter through their first little house in Augusta. She could almost hear his voice again, the gentle humor that always softened his warnings. "You never could see the bad coming, Evie," he used to say. "You think the best of people until they prove otherwise. That is your strength, but it will be your heartbreak too." Her gaze fell to the desk. A silver pen rested beside a guest book embossed with the Ashmore family crest. She picked it up slowly, the weight of it smooth and familiar in her palm. It was almost identical to the pen Thomas had used when signing their will, a classic silver fountain pen with a small engraving along the clip. Evelyn uncapped it and turned it in the light. The metal glinted sharply, catching her reflection in the polished surface. For a fleeting second, she saw both of them there. Herself and the woman she used to be, sitting side by side in the reflection. She capped the pen again and set it down beside the letter. Outside, a burst of laughter rose from the terrace, followed by the clink of champagne glasses. The celebration continued, untouched by the storm that had just opened in her heart. Evelyn leaned back in the chair, staring up at the shelves around her. Dozens of books stood there, perfect and unread, the way Rachel seemed to want her life to be, decorative, manageable, silent. She whispered, "You saw it coming, Thomas. You tried to warn me." Her voice cracked. And I still wasn't ready. She folded the letter again and slipped it into her purse, sliding it next to her own worn library card. The two pieces of her life, the world she had built, and the warning she could no longer ignore, touched like mirrors meeting edge to edge. When she rose, her shadow stretched long across the polished floor, a quiet shape that belonged to no one but herself. The party would end soon. Tomorrow would bring conversations, decisions, and perhaps confrontations she could not yet imagine. But tonight, under the hum of the cold library lights, she understood something clearly for the first time. Her daughter was planning to take her life apart one signature at a time. And Evelyn Hart, gentle and polite and endlessly forgiving, was finally ready to stop her. The morning after the wedding, the world outside Evelyn's window was quiet and gray, the kind of morning that carries a hangover of emotion rather than drink. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold beside her, the unopened newspaper folded neatly next to it. The letter from Thomas lay in front of her, its creases deeper now, the edges beginning to curl from being held too long. She had not slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the words returned. "She is preparing papers. Do not let her sign for you." They looped in her mind until she could hear Thomas's voice behind them, calm but urgent. By the time the first light reached the window, Evelyn had already made up her mind. She dressed simply, tied her hair back, and drove across town to the library where she had worked for 3 decades. It was an old brick building near the waterfront, its tall arched windows fogged slightly by the damp morning air. Even after 3 years of retirement, her body seemed to remember every creak of the wooden steps, every echo of her own footsteps in the hallway. Inside, the scent of paper and dust wrapped around her like an embrace. The smell had always made her feel grounded. This was where she belonged, among the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the soft rustle of pages turning. At the circulation desk, a familiar voice called out. "Evelyn Hart, as I live and breathe," said Margie Dalton, her oldest friend and colleague. "You are a sight for sore eyes. How was the wedding? Did the Ashmores live up to their reputation for perfection?" Evelyn managed a small smile. "Perfection is one word for it." Margie raised an eyebrow, sensing the undercurrent. They had been through too many budget meetings and too many life storms together for Margie to miss the tone. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to a table near the reference section. "Tell me everything." Evelyn hesitated. She was not ready to speak the full truth aloud, not yet. Instead, she pulled the letter from her purse and unfolded it halfway, enough to show the name written there, Willow Creek Manor. "I need to know what this place really is," she said quietly. "Not the brochure version, the real one." Margie's eyes narrowed with curiosity, but not judgment. "Let me guess. Assisted living. Sounds like one of those glossy brochure places where they charge a fortune for sunlight and a cup of tea." "Something like that," Evelyn replied. Margie stood, all business now. "Then let us find out who they really are." They settled into the rhythm they had perfected years ago, working side by side without needing many words. Margie typed quickly, the keys clicking like raindrops. Evelyn scanned through pages of state records, inspection reports, and legal notices. The information was scattered across databases that required patience to piece together, but patience was something both women had in abundance. After an hour, Margie leaned back in her chair. "Well, this is interesting," she said, turning the monitor toward Evelyn. "Willow Creek has been investigated twice by the Massachusetts Department of Health and Human Services, both times for something they call high-pressure enrollment tactics." Evelyn frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they convince families to sign contracts during emotional moments, funerals, hospital stays, that sort of thing. The complaints say the residents were asked to transfer property titles and bank accounts in exchange for guaranteed lifetime care." "Estate care guarantee," Evelyn murmured. The words from Thomas's letter clicked into place. Margie nodded. That's their trademarked program. Looks like it is supposed to protect the residents' assets, but the fine print says otherwise. The families lose ownership as soon as they sign. And there's more. She scrolled down. 2 lawsuits were filed in the past 5 years. Both were settled quietly. Evelyn felt a slow burn rise in her chest. Rachel brought these brochures to her father. She must have known. Or someone helped her know, Margie said carefully. They searched deeper, moving from public records to archived news articles, business listings, and charity filings. The air around them filled with the soft mechanical hum of computers and the faint whisper of pages turning at nearby tables. Outside, the rain began to fall in steady sheets against the tall windows, turning the light in the room a pale silver. Margie tapped her screen again. Look at this. The foundation that funds Willow Creek lists several private donors. Most are anonymous, but one name appears on multiple annual reports. Evelyn leaned closer. The words on the page were small, but the name was unmistakable, Vivian Ashmore. Her breath caught. She's one of their benefactors? Margie nodded. A major one. According to this, she sits on the advisory board. That's not casual involvement. That's ownership of influence. Evelyn stared at the name. A faint tremor went through her hand as she reached for her teacup, but she set it down without drinking. So that's how Rachel found the place. It wasn't research. It was recommendation. Margie watched her quietly. Do you want me to print this? Yes, Evelyn said. All of it. The printer began to hum, spitting out sheets of evidence one by one. Each page felt heavier than paper should. When the last document slid into the tray, Evelyn gathered them carefully, aligning the edges with a precision that came from years of shelving books. From her purse, she pulled out something she had not touched in months. Her old library card, laminated and slightly worn at the corners. She slid the papers into a folder and tucked the card inside, using it as a marker. It was a small gesture, but it steadied her. That card represented everything she had built: years of service, community, quiet dignity, and knowledge earned honestly. She had always believed that truth, once uncovered, had the power to restore balance. Now she held that belief like armor. Margie reached across the table, resting her hand gently on Evelyn's wrist. You know what this means, don't you? Evelyn met her eyes. Yes, it means Thomas was right. And it means Vivian Ashmore isn't just part of Rachel's new family. She's part of a machine that profits from fear. Margie nodded slowly. What are you going to do? Evelyn looked down at the folder in her hands. I am going to find out exactly how deep this goes. And then I am going to stop it before they decide what my life is worth. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. Evelyn stood by the window, watching a young woman hurry across the street with a stack of books clutched to her chest, head bent against the damp air. It reminded her of herself at 25, walking into this same building for her first day of work, full of quiet determination. Margie came to stand beside her. You always said information was power, she murmured. Evelyn smiled faintly. It still is. When she left the library, the folder was tucked securely under her arm. The streetlights had begun to glow, casting long reflections in the puddles that lined the sidewalk. Each step she took echoed softly against the wet pavement. She did not feel afraid anymore. Knowledge had given her back what the wedding had stolen, her sense of direction. Vivian Ashmore might control a mansion and a network of influence, but Evelyn Hart had something far stronger. She had truth. And she had time. And she had no intention of being anyone's silent signature. The Boston Harbor Bistro was one of those places that tried to feel effortless, but reeked of preparation. Every table was set with perfect symmetry. White napkins folded with military precision. A single stem of hydrangea rested in each crystal vase, its color matching the pale blue of the sea beyond the windows. It was elegant, expensive, and meticulously curated like the life Rachel was building for herself. Evelyn arrived 10 minutes early, as she always did. She chose a seat by the window where she could watch the ferries crossing the harbor. The sight soothed her, The boats came and went, each one following a steady rhythm that nothing seemed able to disturb. She touched her purse lightly, reassured by the weight of Thomas's silver pen resting inside. She had carried it with her since reading the letter. It was smooth and cool, the kind of object that seemed to remember the hand that had once used it. In some ways, it was the closest thing she had left of him. Rachel appeared precisely on time, her heels clicking on the tiled floor. She wore a soft cream coat, her hair pinned in a loose bun that looked casual but probably took half an hour to arrange. Her perfume lingered a second before she even sat down. "Mom," she said warmly, leaning forward to kiss Evelyn's cheek. "You look lovely. That color suits you." Evelyn smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart. You look happy." "I am," Rachel said, signaling the waiter with a practiced wave. "Married life is busy, but I love it. Michael's been amazing, and Patricia is helping me get involved with a few local charities. I'm learning so much about networking, about managing things properly." Evelyn listened quietly. There was something careful in Rachel's tone, as if every word had been weighed before being spoken. When the waiter came, they ordered light salads and coffee. Rachel launched into stories about the honeymoon in Greece, the fundraisers in Beacon Hill, and the guest lists she had helped organize. It was polite conversation, cheerful and safe. But underneath it, Evelyn sensed the real reason for the invitation waiting like a stone under smooth water. After the waiter left, Rachel's smile softened. "Mom, I wanted to talk about something important, and I hope you'll hear me with an open mind." Evelyn stirred her coffee. "All right, what is it?" "This isn't about control," Rachel began, her voice gentle but rehearsed. "It's about peace of mind, for both of us." There it was, the line that always preceded a sale. Evelyn said nothing. Rachel continued. "You've been living alone for a long time now. That apartment in Portland isn't bad, but it's small, and the neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be. Michael and I have been talking, and we just want to make sure you're comfortable. That's all." "Comfortable," Evelyn repeated, her voice calm. "And what would that look like exactly?" Rachel leaned forward slightly, her eyes bright. "There's a wonderful place not far from Boston, right near the ocean. It's called Willow Creek Manor. You'd love it, Mom. They have gardens, art classes, even a library. Patricia told me about it years ago. They specialize in helping people transition gracefully into the next stage of life. You wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore." Evelyn took a slow sip of her coffee. "Anything?" Rachel hesitated. "Well, yes. Meals, medical support, companionship, everything you need." "Including my bank account?" Evelyn asked quietly. Rachel froze for a fraction of a second, then smiled again, too quickly. "Oh, Mom, it's not like that. The way they structure it is very modern. You transfer your assets into a trust, and the facility guarantees lifetime care in return. It's called the Estate Care Guarantee. You'd never have to think about bills or taxes or property maintenance again. Isn't that wonderful?" Evelyn set her cup down carefully, the porcelain making a small, deliberate sound against the saucer. "So I give them everything I've worked for, and they promise to take care of me." "It's more than a promise," Rachel said earnestly. "It's security. You wouldn't be burdened with responsibility. You could just live." Evelyn studied her daughter's face. Rachel's expression was open, persuasive, just as it had been when she was a teenager trying to convince her parents to let her go on unsupervised trips. But there was something else there now, a sharpness behind the charm. "Who told you about this program?" Evelyn asked softly. Rachel blinked. "I told you, Patricia mentioned it. She's a patron. She said it's one of the best in the state. They even offer counseling to help families adjust." "Families or investors?" Evelyn murmured. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." Evelyn smiled faintly, brushing a crumb from the tablecloth. "I'm just curious." The waiter arrived with their salads, and for a few minutes the conversation drifted into silence, broken only by the clinking of forks. Outside, a seagull landed on the railing near the window, watching them with sharp, knowing eyes. Evelyn pushed her food around her plate but barely tasted it. Rachel was talking again, explaining how the transition would work. There would be paperwork, but she could handle it. "You've always trusted me with the details, Mom," she said gently. "Let me do that for you one more time." Evelyn looked at her daughter for a long time, then reached into her purse. She withdrew Thomas's silver pen and placed it on the table beside her plate. The light caught it, glinting faintly, a quiet reminder of another man's warning. Rachel's gaze followed it. "Is that Dad's?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "He used it to sign every important document we ever made." Rachel smiled softly. "Then it's perfect, isn't it? You could use it to sign the new papers too. It's like keeping him part of the process." Evelyn's hand closed around the pen. The metal was cool, grounding. She felt Thomas there in the weight of it, in the firmness it gave her spine. She took a deep breath and said lightly, "I'll think about it." Rachel relaxed visibly, her shoulders lowering. "Good. I'm glad. I just want what's best for you, Mom. You've done so much for me. It's time someone took care of you." Evelyn smiled, but the expression never reached her eyes. "You're right, darling. It is time someone did." When the waiter brought the check, Rachel reached for it. Evelyn let her, watching the efficiency with which her daughter handled the payment, the polite nod to the staff, the perfect manners that had earned her a place in the Ashmore world. As they stood to leave, Evelyn slipped the silver pen back into her purse. Her fingers brushed the edge of the folder she had taken from the library. Inside it lay every record, every complaint, every warning about Willow Creek Manor and Vivian Ashmore's name written clearly on the advisory board. Outside the restaurant, the harbor glittered under the midday sun. Rachel kissed her mother's cheek again before walking toward her car. Evelyn stayed behind for a moment, watching her daughter disappear into the crowd of people in expensive coats. The breeze carried the faint smell of salt and coffee. She reached into her bag and held the pen once more. She whispered to herself, "You taught her confidence, Thomas. Now I will teach her consequence." Then she walked away, her step steady, the pen still warm in her hand. The invitation came in the form of a phone call that sounded rehearsed. Rachel's voice was smooth and deliberate, the way she used to sound before presenting a client pitch. "Mom, we'd love to have you over tonight," she said. "Just a quiet family conversation. Nothing serious." The words "nothing serious" carried the same tone as a doctor saying, "This won't hurt a bit." Evelyn agreed without hesitation. She had been waiting for this. By the time she arrived at Rachel and Daniel's house in Cambridge, dusk had turned the sky into a muted lavender. The grand colonial home stood perfectly lit, its windows glowing with the golden light of curated comfort. Through the glass, she could see silhouettes moving Rachel's quick, precise gestures, Vivian's still figure near the fireplace, Daniel pacing slightly by the mantel. Evelyn paused on the porch. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the polished glass of the door. She adjusted her scarf, steadied her breathing, and rang the bell. Daniel opened it almost immediately, offering a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "Mrs. Hart," he said, "come in. We're just getting started." Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and tension. The living room looked like a photograph from a lifestyle magazine, every cushion fluffed, every candle lit. On the coffee table, a neat stack of documents sat beside a crystal water pitcher and 3 glasses. Evelyn recognized the top sheet immediately. Legal forms, power of attorney, asset transfer authorization, admission consent. Vivian sat straight-backed on the sofa, pearls glinting at her throat. Rachel was beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap. Daniel moved to the armchair opposite, his expression composed but strained. Evelyn remained standing. "Mom," Rachel began softly, gesturing toward the sofa across from them. "Please, sit. We just want to talk." Evelyn sat, slowly, keeping her purse beside her. "About what?" Rachel exchanged a look with Vivian before continuing. "We've noticed you've seemed a little distracted lately, forgetting small things. Appointments, bills, nothing alarming, of course, but enough that we think it's time to plan ahead. We're worried about you living alone." Vivian nodded with practiced concern. "At your age, my dear, Independence can sometimes become isolation. It's not about control, it's about care. Evelyn let the words wash over her, saying nothing. Daniel leaned forward. We've spoken with a lawyer who specializes in elder care. He suggested formalizing a few documents to make things easier if you ever need medical or financial assistance. It's all standard procedure. Rachel reached for the papers, smoothing them with trembling hands. It's just about making sure everything is in place. You'll still have complete freedom, of course. We're just trying to be responsible. Evelyn looked at the signature lines at the bottom of the page. Her name was printed neatly beneath each one. Power of attorney, she read aloud. That gives you control over my accounts. Only if you're unable to manage them, Rachel said quickly. It's for emergencies. And this one, Evelyn said, tapping another page. Admission consent for Willow Creek Manor. Rachel inhaled sharply. That's just a precaution. You wouldn't have to move right away. It's simply to secure a spot. They have a waiting list, you know. Vivian smiled, but her voice had cooled. Rachel and I both thought it best to handle this before it becomes urgent. The facility is very selective. Evelyn opened her purse. The faint metallic click of the clasp cut through the silence. Slowly, she reached inside and withdrew an envelope old, creased, its edges softened by time. The room seemed to still. Rachel frowned. What's that? A letter, Evelyn said. From your father. Vivian shifted in her seat, her posture stiffening. Thomas? Evelyn unfolded the paper with deliberate care. He wrote it 3 years ago, when he was dying. He wanted me to read it if you ever forgot who we were. Rachel's hands tightened on her knees. Mom, please, not this. But Evelyn had already begun. Her voice was calm, steady, but each word carried weight. My dearest Evelyn, she read, if you are reading this, it means Sarah has shown you who she's become, not who she used to be. She paused, glancing up. He used your name in the letter, Rachel, but we both know who he meant. Rachel swallowed, her eyes flickering toward Daniel. Evelyn continued. She's been asking questions about our finances. She brought me brochures from Willow Creek Manor, saying her mother needs structure. She's preparing papers to transfer your assets. Don't let her sign for you. Vivian's face went pale. That's absurd. Evelyn looked directly at her. Is it? Because your name appears on every advisory report for Willow Creek's funding committee. You're not just a supporter, you're its financial patron. You profit from those transfers. For the first time that evening, Vivian's poise faltered. The corners of her mouth tightened, and a faint tremor passed through her hands. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. Rachel, is this true? Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was small. I only wanted to help. I thought it would make things easier. Evelyn's tone softened, though the authority beneath it never wavered. You wanted to make things easier for yourself, so you could live comfortably without the inconvenience of an aging mother. Rachel shook her head. That's not fair. Fair, Evelyn said quietly. Thomas spent his final days protecting me from this. He saw what was coming, and now I see it too. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the chandelier above them. Its light flickered across the documents on the table, catching on the ink of her printed name. Daniel leaned back, his face unreadable. You asked me to be here tonight to help your mother, Rachel. You didn't tell me about this. Rachel's voice cracked. I thought I was doing the right thing. Vivian spoke sharply. We don't need to dramatize this. These papers are practical, sensible. Evelyn folded the letter and slipped it back into her purse. No, Mrs. Ashmore, these papers are theft wrapped in etiquette, and I won't be part of it. For a long moment, no one moved. The chandelier swayed slightly from the draft of the air vent, scattering points of light across the walls. Rachel's mascara had smudged, leaving faint streaks beneath her eyes. Daniel stared at the table, his jaw tight. Evelyn stood slowly, gathering her composure like a cloak. Your father saw this coming, she said, her voice low but firm. And now, so do I. She picked up the silver pen that rested beside the papers, the same pen Thomas had once used to sign their will, and slipped it into her bag. Then she turned toward the door. Behind her, no one spoke. The light glittered coldly on the untouched glasses of water, the unsigned documents, the perfect stillness of a family moment shattered beyond repair. When she stepped outside, the night air hit her like a wave of clarity. The stars above Boston were faint but visible, their light older than any deception. For the first time in years, Evelyn Hart did not feel small. She felt seen, if only by the ghosts who had warned her to open her eyes. Morning sunlight spilled through the windows of Evelyn's apartment, soft and golden, illuminating the stack of papers spread across her kitchen table. Each page told part of a story, one that had been buried under the language of care and respectability. The truth was no longer hidden in fine print. It was now in plain sight. Evelyn arranged the documents carefully. Complaints from state investigations, tax records, board filings with Vivian Ashmore's signature at the bottom. She slipped everything into a folder, along with a copy of Thomas's letter. Then she added her old library card to the front pocket, the same one she had used to gather the research. It felt like armor. That afternoon, she drove back to Cambridge. She had not called ahead. Some conversations needed the element of surprise. When Vivian opened the door, her expression flickered from politeness to irritation. "Evelyn, I wasn't expecting you." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I know. That's why I came." In the living room, Rachel and Daniel were seated at the same table where the confrontation had taken place 2 nights earlier. The stack of unsigned papers was gone, replaced by an uneasy silence that hung in the air like smoke. Vivian gestured stiffly toward a chair. "We were just having coffee." "I won't stay long," Evelyn said, setting the folder on the table. "I brought something you should see." Rachel glanced at it, her hands tightening around her cup. "Mom, please. Can we not do this again?" Evelyn ignored her and opened the folder. "This isn't about resentment, Rachel. It's about truth." She spread the papers across the table, one after another, each page sliding into place with quiet precision. These are public records from the Massachusetts Department of Health and Human Services. They show that Willow Creek Manor has been investigated twice in the last 5 years for aggressive marketing tactics. Specifically, they target widows within 3 months of losing their spouses. Vivian let out a small laugh that did not reach her eyes. "Every facility gets complaints, Evelyn. That's hardly proof of wrongdoing." Evelyn looked directly at her. "Then why does yours file for tax credits for every new widow enrolled within 90 days? The color drained from Vivian's face. "That's nonsense." "It's not," Evelyn said calmly, sliding another page forward. "This is your name, Mrs. Ashmore. Right here, under the Philanthropic Partnership section of the annual report. You receive a donor credit for each placement, what they call it when a family signs over a relative's estate. You don't just donate, you profit." Daniel leaned forward, studying the page. "Vivian, is this true?" Vivian's poise cracked, just slightly. "It's a standard practice in elder care philanthropy. The facilities reward benefactors who help them reach vulnerable clients. It's how we sustain the programs." Rachel's voice was a whisper. "You mean how you sustain your social circles?" Vivian turned sharply. "Rachel, you're being ungrateful. Everything I've done is to maintain our family's reputation." Evelyn straightened in her chair. "At the cost of other people's lives. Do you know how many of those widows lost their homes? How many of them died without realizing their families had already signed away everything they owned?" Vivian rose to her feet, her pearls catching the light. "You're exaggerating. Those women were cared for." "Cared for?" Evelyn repeated softly. "That's what you call stripping someone's independence and selling it as peace of mind?" The silence that followed was long and sharp. The only sound came from the faint ticking of the clock above the fireplace. Daniel broke it first. "Rachel," he said quietly, "your mom's right." Rachel turned toward him, startled. "Daniel." "No," he said, his voice steady. I looked into the numbers myself after she left that night. I checked the property records for Willow Creek. It's true, the facility holds the deeds to more than 20 private homes in its name. Every one of them belonged to a widow who enrolled after losing a spouse. He looked at Vivian. And 5 of those homes were sold through a company tied to your foundation. Vivian's composure shattered. You have no idea what it costs to keep these programs running. Evelyn met her gaze. What it costs is human dignity. What it earns is your comfort. Rachel's hands flew to her face. Tears had begun to spill silently down her cheeks. Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. Patricia Vivian, she told me it was about helping you. I know, Evelyn said gently. You believed what you wanted to believe. That's how they convince people. They use words like safety, like care, until you can't hear the word control anymore. Vivian turned toward the window, her shoulders rigid. You think you can destroy me with this? The Ashmore name will outlast you. Evelyn smiled faintly. It might, but your reputation won't survive the truth. And the truth has a way of finding light. She gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder. I don't want your downfall, Mrs. Ashmore. I just want my daughter's freedom. And mine. Rachel looked up, her eyes red but resolute. You have it, Mom. You always did. I just forgot. Daniel placed a hand over hers. We can fix this. We'll make sure those facilities are investigated again. Vivian's voice was barely audible. You would betray your own family? No, Daniel said. I'd be protecting it from what it's become. Evelyn rose, the folder tucked under her arm. The weight of it no longer felt heavy. It felt purposeful. I'm leaving copies of these records with my attorney, she said. If anything happens to me, they'll go to the press. Rachel stood too, her voice trembling. Mom, I'm so sorry. Evelyn reached out, brushing a tear from her daughter's cheek. Then start by doing something right. Tell the truth. That's how we begin again. She turned to Vivian one last time. You built your empire on the illusion of care. But what you really sold was silence. I won't be part of it. The older woman said nothing. Her jaw was tight, her expression brittle. Evelyn walked to the door, her hand resting briefly on the silver pen in her pocket. It had belonged to Thomas, but now it belonged to her, a symbol of the same strength that had carried her through years of loss, work, and quiet endurance. She looked back once, her voice steady. Thomas saw this coming, he warned me, but he also taught me something you never understood, Vivian. Power built on fear collapses the moment someone refuses to be afraid. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Outside, the wind carried the chill of early evening. The city lights shimmered across the Charles River, and Evelyn stood for a long moment, breathing in the cool air. She took out her phone and opened a blank message. Her fingers hovered for a moment before typing. To the Office of State Investigations, Elder Care Division. Subject, Willow Creek Manor, Financial Misconduct Report. She pressed send. Somewhere inside the house behind her, raised voices began to argue, but Evelyn didn't turn back. As she walked toward her car, she thought of all the women she had met through the years at the library, the widows, the caretakers, the quiet ones who always apologized for asking questions. Not anymore. She started the engine, her reflection flickering in the rearview mirror, a calm, determined woman staring back at herself. If you believe no senior should be pressured into giving up their freedom, she murmured, share this story with someone you love. Then she drove forward, into a night that no longer frightened her. The spring came quietly to Portland that year. The air softened, the ocean smelled of new beginnings, and for the first time in months, Evelyn's mornings were no longer heavy. She kept her days simple, walks along the harbor, coffee at the corner cafe, a weekly book club at the library where her laughter began to sound like it used to. Then, one Saturday in May, Rachel appeared at her door. She stood on the porch with her shoulders slightly hunched, wearing jeans and a pale sweater instead of the elegant dresses she used to favor. Her hair was pulled back loosely, strands falling out in a way that once would have driven her crazy. Now she didn't seem to notice. "Mom," she said quietly, "can we talk?" Evelyn hesitated, not because she was angry, but because forgiveness required more than time. It needed understanding. She stepped aside. "Come in." Rachel walked in slowly, looking around the apartment as if it were unfamiliar. She paused at the small bookshelf near the window, where Evelyn kept framed photographs of Thomas, her younger self, and the library staff at her retirement party. "Dad would have liked this place," Rachel said softly. Evelyn smiled faintly. He liked anywhere that had a view of the water. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Evelyn had once organized the documents that changed everything. Now it was covered only by a vase of tulips and 2 mugs of tea. For a while, neither of them spoke. Rachel stared into her cup, her hands clasped around it like a prayer. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Mom, I wasn't trying to hurt you. I need you to believe that. I was terrified." Evelyn listened without interrupting. Rachel took a shaky breath. "When Dad got sick, I watched you take care of him. You never complained, you never stopped. But after he died, I kept seeing those moments, the exhaustion in your eyes, the nights you slept in the chair by his bed. I kept thinking I couldn't do what you did. I couldn't carry that kind of pain again, so I tried to control it before it could happen." She wiped her eyes, her mascara smudging faintly. "I thought if I planned enough, if I arranged everything neatly, I could make the future less frightening. I told myself I was protecting you, but really, I was protecting myself from the thought of losing you too." Evelyn's throat tightened, but she stayed still. "Love isn't about control, Rachel. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Rachel nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I know, I'm learning that. I started seeing a therapist after everything with Willow Creek. She's helping me understand why I need everything to be perfect, why I equate order with safety." "That's a good start," Evelyn said gently. Rachel reached across the table, her hand trembling slightly. Evelyn hesitated only for a moment before taking it. Her daughter's fingers were warm and familiar, the same hand she used to hold while crossing the street, the same hand that once clung to her skirt at the sound of thunder. "I'm sorry, Mom," Rachel whispered. "I thought strength meant control, but you've shown me it means something else." Evelyn squeezed her hand. "It means standing in the truth, even when it hurts." They sat like that for a long time, the afternoon light shifting across the floor. Outside, gulls cried over the water, their wings flashing white against the gray sky. Later, they walked to the cafe down the street, the one Evelyn visited every week. The place was small, the kind of spot where the barista knew your name and the tables wobbled slightly no matter how often they were adjusted. They ordered tea and a shared slice of lemon cake. Rachel looked around, smiling faintly. "I see why you like it here. It feels real." "It is," Evelyn said. "No one's pretending to be something they're not." They ate in silence for a while. Then Rachel set down her fork. "Mom, can I ask you something? Something I should have asked a long time ago?" "Of course." Rachel took a breath. "What do you actually want for your future?" Evelyn looked out the window. The harbor glistened in the distance, sunlight breaking through thin clouds. The answer came to her easily, without hesitation. "To be seen," she said softly, "not managed." Rachel nodded slowly, tears in her eyes again, but this time they were calm. "I can do that." Evelyn smiled. "Then we'll be all right." The conversation drifted after that. They talked about books, about the flowers in the park, about the way grief had changed but never disappeared. For the first time, their words felt equal, not filtered through guilt or fear. As they stood to leave, Rachel reached out again, her hand finding her mother's. "Can I see you next weekend? Maybe take you to the farmer's market?" Evelyn nodded. "I'd like that." They stepped outside into the late afternoon sun. The wind carried the scent of salt and spring blossoms, and for the first time in a long while, Evelyn felt something she had not dared to name. Peace. She knew the road ahead would not be perfect. Healing rarely was. But as she watched her daughter walk beside her, she understood that love, when freed from control, could finally breathe again. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, Evelyn realized that this was the life she had been fighting for all along. The one where she was not managed or diminished, but seen, respected, and finally understood. The morning light stretched across the harbor like a promise. The air smelled of salt and new beginnings as Evelyn zipped up her suitcase, smoothing the edges of her clothes the way she used to smooth the pages of returned library books. It had been 1 year since the night she read Thomas's letter aloud, 1 year since the truth fractured and then reshaped her family into something more honest. Her flight to Edinburgh was in 6 hours. Scotland had always been the dream she and Thomas had whispered about during the long winters. He wanted to see the Highlands. She wanted to walk the cobblestone streets of small towns where stories felt older than time. They had planned it for their 40th anniversary, but cancer had come instead. Now, Evelyn was going for both of them. She sat on the edge of her bed and opened her travel folder. Her passport lay inside, along with her ticket and a neatly folded checklist of emergency contacts. On top of them, she placed 2 items, her worn library card and Thomas's letter. The library card, because knowledge had been her weapon and her freedom. The letter, because love, even in loss, had been her compass. She smiled, whispering softly to the air, "You were right, Tom. It took me a while, but I learned." When Rachel arrived to drive her to the airport, she carried coffee and a scarf. "It gets cold on the plane," she said, draping it over her mother's shoulders. The gesture was simple, but it carried a tenderness Evelyn had once feared was gone forever. They loaded the suitcase into the car. As they pulled away from the apartment, Rachel reached over and squeezed her mother's hand. "I still can't believe you're actually doing it," she said. Evelyn chuckled. "Neither can I. But your father always said dreams expire if you don't use them." They talked about small things during the drive. Rachel's new job at a nonprofit that advocated for senior housing rights. Daniel's volunteer work with a local community center, the new library wing that had been dedicated in Evelyn's honor. It had been Rachel's idea, a quiet way of saying thank you. When they reached the airport, Rachel parked and turned to her mother. There were tears in her eyes, but they were the good kind, the kind that come when love replaces guilt. "Mom," she said softly, "Dad would say the best thing he ever gave me was you." Evelyn smiled, her own eyes misting. "And the best thing he gave me was the courage to live." They hugged for a long time. No promises, no apologies, just understanding. Inside the terminal, Evelyn walked through the crowd with a calm steadiness that came from having nothing left to prove. At security, when she handed over her passport, she felt the faint outline of the letter inside. It felt like a heartbeat. But before boarding, she made one last stop. She took a taxi to the library. The building looked the same as it always had. Red brick, tall windows, the faint scent of old paper drifting through the doors. Margie was at the front desk, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Look who's here," she said with a grin. "Shouldn't you be at the airport?" "Soon," Evelyn said. "I just need to leave something behind." She walked to the community bulletin board, the one covered in book club flyers and tutoring schedules. From her bag, she took a single sheet of paper she had typed herself. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Checklist, 8 questions to ask before you sign anything." Below that were her 8 points. Who profits from your signature? What happens to your property if you can no longer manage it? Who witnesses your choices, and do they understand them? Have you read every page? Have you spoken to someone you trust, not someone who benefits? Can you walk away without losing more than you gain? What are they not telling you? Do you feel respected or managed? She pinned it to the board, pressing the thumbtack firmly into place. Then she stepped back. The paper looked small among the colorful notices, but she knew someone would stop and read it. Someone always did. Margie came to stand beside her. "You're still teaching," she said softly. Evelyn smiled. "I suppose I always will." When she finally returned to the taxi, the sky had turned pale gold. She looked out at the harbor one last time, the water catching light like glass. Somewhere in the distance, the ferry horn echoed a sound she had always loved for its sense of departure. She opened her phone and recorded a short message for the channel that had shared her story months ago. Her voice was steady, her words simple. "If you've ever fought to keep your independence," she said, "your story matters. Share it below. Someone out there needs your courage tonight." She paused, the faint hum of the airport speaker behind her. "Freedom isn't the absence of care," she added. "It's the presence of choice." Then she ended the recording, slipped her phone into her bag, and walked toward her gate. When the plane lifted off the runway, Evelyn looked down at the receding coastline, her reflection faint against the window. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw Thomas beside her, smiling the way he used to when he knew she was about to do something brave. She reached into her pocket and touched the folded letter. "We made it, Tom," she whispered. "We finally made it." And as the clouds opened up to the morning sun, Evelyn Hart flew toward a life that was entirely, beautifully her own. Ending message: Evelyn's legacy lives. On every story we tell here reminds us that strength does not always roar. Sometimes it speaks quietly in the voice of a woman who refuses to be erased. Evelyn Hart's journey is not just about a mother and daughter or the fight for independence. It is about every person who has ever been told to sit down, stay quiet, and sign without question, and chose instead to stand, speak, and live freely. If you have ever faced a moment where you had to protect your dignity, your home, or your voice, then you already carry the same courage that guided Evelyn. The truth is, independence is not about living alone. It is about being heard, being seen, and choosing your own path, no matter your age. We tell these stories because someone, somewhere, is still fighting that quiet battle tonight. And maybe, through Evelyn's story, they will find the strength to keep going. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter so you never miss the next journey of resilience, hope, and renewal. And if you have your own story of courage, of heartbreak, of rediscovering your strength, tell it in the comments below. Because your story matters, and someone out there, perhaps watching in silence right now, needs your light to find their way home.